Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Fatherhood on the Field podcast. I am your host, Luke Sawyer, and for the first time I get to do this in studio with someone, which is fun. But excited to have Chris Tanton on with us today. Obviously, Chris, you're going to fill us in on yourself and everything, but you and I go back to 2015, I believe was probably when we first met.
Yeah.
And Chris and his wife Abby were living as missionaries in the Dominican Republic as we were living down there too. Got to spend a lot of time together and enjoy Dominican living and all the things that went into living in third world countries and those challenges and blessings and so just super excited to have you on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting.
So before we get into kind of what we're going to talk about today, tell us a little bit about you, your family. All that jazz.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very suburban, typical household. Parents are married, but not particularly religious. Casual, lukewarm Christians at best. I was a baseball guy my whole life. I ended up playing at Berry College up in North Georgia. I got saved between my junior and senior year of college. A guy that discipled me on campus was pretty instrumental in that. Just was very intentional about asking me out to lunch and just talking and asking me questions. And it was definitely that intentional approach that kind of got me there. Wound up at a Christian school in Kennesaw out of college. I spent 12 years there. Again, I would say I was probably on the lukewarm side the first couple of years of that, but then the Lord just really set my heart on fire around 2010. We took a short-term trip to the Dominican, and then that just blew the doors open and changed a lot of things for me. We made 8 or 10 trips, short-term, visiting the FCM ministry you were working with and things like that, and then wound up moving there in 2016. We spent 3.5 years there. Came back right before COVID, which was probably a blessing to not do COVID abroad.
Sure.
And then, now I'm running my own small business, and I'm just living back in the States. That's where we're at now.
Outside of Atlanta.
That's right.
And to getting to enjoy some Florida time down here with me.
That's right. And I'm married, wonderful wife Abby. She's great. No kids. So yeah. That's my world.
Well, and I think that's interesting because that kind of launches us into where we're going to go. I'm excited about this episode specifically because I think it speaks to a lot of people as you are not a father yourself, but have modeled fatherhood in so many different ways. And going back to, we're going to get into this here, but the work that you guys did in the Dominican Republic was specifically around fatherlessness in a lot of ways. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we intentionally targeted young men ages 10 to 18 in our ministry, and we were trying to basically serve as father figures, my wife and I. Most of them were fatherless, and if they did have a dad around, he wasn't active in their lives at all. He was maybe physically present, but not in any other way. And what we saw there was you had to earn their trust, and over time, as we earned their trust, the walls came down, and then they started calling us mom and dad, and they viewed us as their parents in many ways, and we were providing for their physical needs. We were feeding them a few times a week. We were making sure they had school supplies. We were following up and making sure they were in school, those kinds of things. But we were also modeling, biblical discipleship to them and showing them what it looked like to intentionally pour into another person, train them up, so to speak.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And, this past week, I was talking with Mitch Hauschild, who's one of the founders of Man Up and Go, and we were talking about just kind of the epidemic, the crisis of fatherlessness that we see globally. So in kind of your experiences, because you've worked in a couple different settings, in school settings as a teacher and as a coach, internationally running a foundation, what does it look like for men, or what would be your advice maybe for men who possibly aren't dads themselves to step into the gap of fatherhood or modeling fatherhood in a certain way for the fatherless? How do you see that actually play out? What does that look like?
I think the first step is intentionality. Someone who says, yeah, I actually want to do that. Because if you don't have a heart posture that says, I care about that human being and I want to pour into their life and I want to meet a need that's not being met by their biological father. And in whatever context you are, whether it's a school setting, a coaching setting, or in a ministry church setting, I think that's the first thing. For me, the big motivating factor, once we got to the Dominican, we started seeing these kids who were having deep needs and seeing kids who were 15 years old but were at the emotional maturity level of a 10-year-old because of all the traumas they'd been through.
Sure.
Stepping into that gap and just letting them snuggle a little bit because that's what they need. And they wouldn't do that until they gained some trust, and that sounds awkward, like in an American context.
Sure.
But in their setting, that's what they needed. And that's what mom and dad would do at home if they had it. So I think a lot of that is just the intentionality of stepping in and being willing and being patient. It's discipleship, just like anywhere else that you do discipleship.
Sure.
For me, it was the data I started digging into that really opened my eyes. I mean, a kid without a father in the home is 4 times more likely to wind up in poverty.
Yeah.
70% of high school dropouts are fatherless. 40% of kids in America right now are fatherless.
That's crazy. That's a
insane.
mind-numbing stat. 40%.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue. Just that hit me.
Yeah. I mean, and it should, and it wasn't that way in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's something that's been cultivating over time, and it's getting worse. And there are plenty of factors that are creating that and causing that, whether it's not wanting to accept responsibility for our choices and so on and so forth. But the data is the data. It's there.
Sure.
And so for us as Christian men, as people who care about the gospel and care about people, how do you not step into those spaces and want to make an impact to make those numbers maybe change course, change direction?
No, 100%. And I think just in talking about the love and affection that you're showing to a child, right? We're looking at it from the fatherless standpoint of I'm looking at these 4 kids that are running around my house and the love and affection that they need, right? But the reality is, as men, authentic masculinity models that in a healthy way for kids that are not our own, biologically speaking, right? And I think it's interesting as we kind of talk fatherhood on the field and the ins and outs of the ability to father well through and around the game of baseball. One of the things that's always striking to me is just the amount of time as coaches, right? And you have a background in coaching. You've been in this game, coached this game. The amount of time that we spend with kids. Oftentimes, I would say possibly coaches are spending more time with kids, at least at the high school level, at the college level, than their parents are spending with them, right?
Absolutely.
And so and I think the detrimental aspects of how coaches approach love and affection, right, or how coaches approach development can have kind of traumatic implications on kids. So, as you've looked at that as a coach, and as someone who's modeling authentic masculinity, how do you see those ties between coaching and fatherhood, if you will?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is if you care more about winning games than you care about your players, you need to get out of coaching. 100%.
No.
And I've had both. I've had coaches that loved mess out of me and were intentional with me, and I've had coaches who treated us terribly and just we were a pawn in the game, and
Sure.
they, whatever skill set we bring to the table, that's our value.
Right.
And for me, that's where it's got to start, is an intentional approach to what am I really here to do as a coach? What am I after here? What's the end game, and how do I measure success? Now, that's tough at the varsity level in high school, the college level, the pro level, because if you don't win enough games, you're going to get fired.
Yeah, you won't have a job anymore.
So I understand you got to win, and winning matters, but you see all across even the pro game, the minor league game, the major league level, minor league level, college level, there are plenty of guys out there that care more about their players than they do their win-loss record.
Sure.
And I think their bosses see that and see that they still understand the game and they still understand what they're doing, but they're doing it the right way.
Right.
So that would be the first thing, is just intentionality.
No, and I think that's huge. I know for me, in coaching college guys for the last number of years, I would always say I couldn't really evaluate my success until I saw what my guys looked like as husbands and fathers.
100%.
Right. So inside of the game, sure, there's wins and losses and stats that you're looking at and saying, are we having success humanly speaking or not? But ultimately, success in coaching is how are we developing, to use kind of a secular word, or ultimately discipling these guys who are under our care. Yep. And I think as coaches, I look at my 4 kids that live in my house, right, and they're all starkly different. And so my approach with my oldest is very different than my approach with my second child, right? Because their personalities are very different. I know if I approach sternly with the older one, he's going to back up. Not to say that I'm not stern. I'm definitely stern at times, but he's going to back up. Like, that's going to affect him. Whereas my second son responds positively to more direct either affirmation or criticism, honestly. And I think in coaching, in a lot of ways, you're learning that similarly with your players.
Oh, 100%. You got to learn. You got to learn how they respond, and one, that's getting the most out of them. But I think it's the way to be the most loving to them. I'd have kids where they'd get a little off mechanically. I make a mound visit, and all I have to say is, "Hey, dude, take a deep breath. We're up 4 runs. You got a great defense behind you. You're fine. I got your back. Your teammates have your back." And then he's throwing strikes again.
Right.
Well, I got a different kid who doesn't need that. He needs a little bit of bulldog. Like, "Hey, dude, let's get fired up here and let's get focused. Let's get locked in." And you handle them differently depending on their personality types, their styles, and but ultimately, all of that is motivated not in, I want you to, I need you to do this so that we can win. It's, I want you to be successful.
Right.
And how do I help you do that as a coach?
Sure. No, and I think that's, as I think about it, that motivation in parenting and fatherhood or in coaching, the motivation behind the action is really the critical thing, right? A lot of times we look and we evaluate the action based on the action itself without looking at the motivation behind it. Yeah. Even in saying, I know, with a certain player, when he does X, Y, or Z, I'm going to be in his face very stern. Like, we're going to have a direct conversation, whereas another guy might be a little softer, and we're going to approach that differently, or it's going to be off on the side of the dugout, not in front of the rest of his teammates. Yeah. Like, I got to know how to manage those 100%. Players like I know how to manage my kids.
100%.
And I think it's the motivation behind it, because the sternness is not always negative. If you have the right motivation, ultimately to capture the heart of either the child or of the athlete,
yeah,
right?
100%.
So, yeah, that's interesting. So, as you've kind of been in this game at the high school level, and then I believe you coached even middle school too, right?
Middle school.
So, what do you see? What have you seen from parents, either positively or negatively, as guys are listening to this podcast and saying, "How do I approach my son or my daughter inside of the game?" What have you seen in your experiences?
Ooh. A lot. At the middle school level, we'd have some parents who were literally already envisioning my kid as a D1 athlete. And you're like, they're not a D1 athlete. They might play college, maybe, but D1's, I don't think you understand how hard that level is. And then I'd have kids come in as a 6th grader and I'd say, yeah, that kid's going to play D1 baseball.
Yep.
But having a practical and rational approach to where your kid is at developmentally at that early stage would be huge. The biggest thing I would say, and this is true for sports as it is for life, just stop trying to bulldoze the path for your kid and make it easy for them.
Yeah.
Stop trying to tackle every issue that's coming their way so that they can have a nice, rosy, simple experience, because then you're going to have a 25-year-old that doesn't know how to set up car insurance because they've never had to do anything meaningful in their life.
Yep.
And so prepare your kid for the path that's coming rather than the other way around. That would be the first thing I would say is, and I saw that in the classroom. I saw it on the ball field. We have way too many parents that think they're advocating for their kid by solving all their problems for them.
Right. And then you get this kind of I don't know if this is the right word for it, but kind of this entitlement culture that you see with older kids, because I even see it at the collegiate level, where kids at a young age have not learned to handle their problems for themselves. They haven't learned to, hey, I'm not getting innings. I'm going to approach my coach and talk about this.
Yes.
and deal with these issues kind of in a one-to-one basis instead of getting mom and dad to do it.
Yes.
And because we even see at a collegiate level that mom and dad are still stepping in a way that I would have never comprehended like that in the past.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it.
Yeah.
And I think it starts at a young age.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I think at every level you step up, the parents should be less and less involved in letting
Sure.
the kid figure it out. But I would frequently tell even my middle school parents, "Hey, I'm not going to discuss playing time with you until your kid has come and approached me first."
Sure.
If the issue is playing time, if
Right.
there's if I've done something wrong, that's a different conversation. But if it's just playing time, no, they need to come talk to me first.
Right. Well, and it's teaching life skills. And I remember back on the first podcast we had, shamelessly plugging that one with Justin Dillard, we talked about how the game ultimately is not meant for the game itself, right? Like these are times and experiences that we have as parents and our kids have ultimately to teach life skills that are going to come in the future, right? Like, and these are things that kids are going to have to continually deal with. And when they're in their first job, right? When they get married and they're having marriage issues, like how do you approach these things and even be okay with having the uncomfortable conversation?
Absolutely.
Because I think and I think that starts at a young age. It starts with my 9-year-old, my 6-year-old, and saying, hey, you need to step up a little bit and handle your stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's part of
100%.
taking responsibility.
100%. But that's a word that's becoming less common and less popular in our society is responsibility.
Yep.
Owning your decisions, owning your words, and the consequences that come from what you do.
So on the flip side then, we've kind of talked the negative things that you've seen from parents.
Yeah.
What have you seen positively from parents as baseball dads are listening to this and thinking, how do I do this well?
Yeah.
How have you seen that modeled?
The first thing is model support for the coach. Because you see, how countless stories of you get in the car and parent and kid are just venting about why is this kid playing here or why is this kid doing that, rather than being a gossip, machine with your kid or talking behind the coach's back. Be an advocate for supporting the coach, supporting the team.
Yeah.
And we'd have parents who were, quick to come up and shake your hand and say, hey, thanks for all you're doing for these boys. And then you'd have others who you never even spoke to them. It's like they never existed. And so coaches across the board at every level are giving way more time than they're being paid for. What they're doing is not for themselves. They're 95+% of coaches are doing it for the kids.
Well, and I think that's it's also, and I feel like so much of this comes back to, it's a great life principle too.
100%.
One of the things I look at in the Bible is when we look at the story of David and Saul, right? That even in the midst of Saul trying to kill David, David still honors Saul as king of Israel. And so I tell my boys all the time, honor the honorables. Even when there's things that you might disagree with, how do you look for opportunities to honor those who are in your life? And I think as parents, we can model that really well for our kids, that even when we might disagree with the way a coach has approached X, Y, or Z, I do think that there's times as parents that we do need to step in and approach coaches if there's things, that are bordering on abuse or other areas that we need to make a stand for our kids. But if we're talking playing time and, issues you might have with game management and baseball philosophy, honor the honorables and model that for your kids so that they see that done well.
Absolutely.
Because in life, you're going to have people that you disagree with for the rest of your life. And you have to learn to honor those people and not gossip about those people behind their back.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is be a fan of every kid on that team and not just your own kid. So your kid rips a double. We're happy. Everyone's happy. And I know you're probably most happy because your kid succeeded.
Sure.
But cheer for the next kid that hits a single and knocks him in, and the kid that's pitching well, and the kid that gets that bunt down, and be an advocate for all the kids and not just your kid.
And that's and just coming full circle on this thing. This is what we're talking about with you, right?
Yeah.
Away from a baseball sense, baseball ultimately is meaningless in this setting. You're fathering the fatherless in a way that you're saying it's not about my biological child necessarily, right? Like there's a gap here that needs to be filled. How can we step in the gap for these other kids? Because guess what? That next kid that comes up that drives your kid in, he might not have the same parental support at home. His dad might not even be at the game. So what does it look like for you to step into the gap for those other kids? Because now you've got this community of people as a baseball parent that I think you should dive into, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whether you like it or you don't, you've got these amount of people that you're going to spend a lot of time with over the course of however long that season is. Yeah. And so how do you start to build relationships where you're not only encouraging the other kids that are on your kid's team, but you're like, their parents, and you're starting to show love and affection to these kids that are not your own, because you don't know what the stories are that are behind the scenes for so many of these kids running out there.
Yep. Well, and little Johnny, his dad might work 100 hours a week, so he never gets to the games.
Right.
Like, that's a cool opportunity for a dad to step into and high five Johnny when he's coming off the field, just like you're high fiving your kid. Hey, dude, I love that bunt you got down today. Way to be selfless. Great job. Or, dude, you had two really awesome at bats today. And little Johnny's thinking, he actually noticed that I had two good at bats. That's cool. And Johnny's going to appreciate and respect that you did that, and you didn't have to do that. It was an intentional decision to, and it doesn't matter if Johnny has his dad there or not. Just do that for all the kids. Yep. Be that intentional, affirming, encouraging presence, and for the coaches too. Hey, coach, great job today. Thanks for all you're doing for our kids. Like that takes no effort on your part other than an intentional choice to be an encourager. That's all it takes.
No, that's huge, man. And I think, as I looked back over just this past baseball season that my boys had, one of the things that I appreciated was the friendships that I built with other dads, where it had nothing to do with the team. Like there was other dads that we'd say, hey, let's just go take the kids out to the field and play, or let's go do a woodworking project together, because I want my boys to see other men modeling masculinity well. I want to expose them to that, because I want them to not just look at dad, but to say, hey, there's a whole community of people out here that are trying to do this well, and I want them to have a voice in your life. And I think as baseball parents, that's something that we can really advocate for the coaches that are in our kids' life, if we're not the ones coaching them, because they do have a voice. Whether you agree with the voice or not, the voice is there. And I know with my kids, as we would go out to the field with other dads, oftentimes I'm telling them something mechanically speaking, if I ever say anything about anything mechanically, that they're not going to listen to me. But Joe Schmo over here might say the exact same thing, and they hear it differently. And I think when you build that community, it's a really healthy thing for your kids to see.
Definitely. 100%.
No, that's awesome. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, one, I appreciate you taking the time to be on here, and I appreciate you in how you've modeled masculinity well, how you've modeled that for kids that maybe have never had that modeled in their life for them. As you, if there was one thing that you wanted to leave for dads on this, to say, this is the one thing I want you guys to hear, what would that be?
Man, well, I've used the word intentional a few times today. I think that would be it, is make intentional choices with your time that you have with your kids. When we came off the field and moved back to the States.
Field being mission field, not baseball field.
Sorry, yes. When we came off the mission field, we chose to live within 20 minutes of our niece and nephew, for the simple reason that my nephew's going to be 15 once. Yep. He's never going to be 15 again. And so he's now a sophomore in high school. Whenever he graduates, that's it. He will be effectively an adult the rest of his life. And the time I have to pour into his life as a teenager is extremely limited. And so rather than choosing to go to Florida or somewhere else, we could have gone anywhere. We chose to be within 20 minutes. And that was an intentional choice to be near our niece and our nephew while they're young. And so as a dad, as a mom, please remember your kid's only 12 once. Yeah. You get that window once. And then once it's gone, and you don't get it back. And so, when you're 60, 70, 80, are you going to look back and say, I wish I'd have put more hours in at work. I wish I'd have done more here or there. No, you're going to say, I wish I would have poured into my kids more. And so be intentional with those decisions and prioritize the time you have with them.
No, that's excellent. And I think just jabs, I think a lot of us dads, because that time is going, man. It's going so quick, and we need to capitalize on every little moment we have because we're not getting that time back.
Yeah. You can always make more money. You can always get more stuff. You can always take more vacation. You can always work more. You don't get more time.
Yeah.
And that's just a reality for all of us.
Yep.
And so that would be my encouragement is be intentional with your time, with your kids. Be present, be loving, be their advocate. Let them fail. Let them get bumps, bruises, scratches, and be there to coach them through it.
No, it's awesome. Beautiful. Well, Chris, I appreciate you being here, brother. And for those of you listening, appreciate you guys being with us. Hopefully we will have another podcast up here in the next couple of weeks. But thanks for listening to Fatherhood on the Field.